All right. Today we're speaking with Geoff Moore from his home in Dallas, Texas, in the United States. Geoff is the president and COO at Team Envy, an esports organization covering various games. He was also the executive vice president for sales and marketing with the NHL franchise, the Dallas Stars, for 18 years, from the point they came in as a new expansion team. Geoff's going to speak to us today about that time and talk a little bit about business in sport with us. So, well, I guess, how are you this afternoon over there, Geoff?
Oh, great, great. A beautiful day here, about 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit.
And so we had a little sporadic rain, but it's beautiful now.
We were talking about that before we got started about Fahrenheit and Celsius and everything. Look, it's an interesting time. We booked to speak with you probably going back about a month ago, and since then, things have changed. How are things in the city at the moment over there?
They're good. You know, we had a remote working environment going because of the pandemic, and our offices are right downtown, right by the American Airlines Center, in kind of a place called Uptown, which is just north of downtown. And so there is a lot of protest activity happening kind of in that area, and a few of the places I've gone to the office a couple of times this week, and like usually the place where I go get lunch didn't have any damage, but some of the other places around had their windows broken. And so there is a little bit of, kind of scarring of that area from not really the protesters, really more of the kind of the group that takes advantage of the fact that protests are happening and come in and, vandalize things. I think they're having more fun than the protesters are. But the protesters are, generally really peaceful, but it's the kind of the people who were bored at home during the virus that saw a great opportunity to get out and have a little bit of fun are really the problem.
Yeah, fair enough. Look, probably the easiest place to start off this conversation with you then today is, I've been to Texas a couple of times from, as I said, we're over in Australia and we fly in directly into Dallas. It's sort of, I think it's the longest route in the world that you can take. And I don't, at the moment, you can't fly Sydney to London, and I think you go Sydney to Dubai, but Sydney to Dallas, I think, is the longest long run that you can do. I was there about a year and a half ago. We spent a little bit of time there, but I think for a lot of people, Texas is this sort of wild, this perception of a cowboy state still. So I guess probably the easiest place to start off, if you want to tell us a little bit about Dallas and how that compares to some of the other cities like rivalries with Houston, San Antonio, El Paso.
Sure. Well, so a couple of, I think they're funny. We'll see how your audience feels. But one time I went to Manhattan. The Dallas Stars were playing the New York Rangers. So we're sitting in these seats, and there was a young woman and her younger brother sitting right in front of us. And she was maybe, in junior high, and he was a grade schooler. And we had a fairly tough team at the time. As you know, they're all Canadian, right? Like there's a couple of maybe Finnish players or Swedish players, but they're all Canadian. And so the game starts, and it's kind of a rough affair. Players are kind of salty. And the young boy turns to his sister and says, "Why is there so much fighting at today's game?" And she said, "Well, these guys are from Texas. That's all they do down there is fight." And my wife and I are sitting there behind him. We both work for the team, and so we start laughing because none of the players are from Texas. But that's one of the reasons why the NHL was so popular with Texans, is because there was a strong sense of frontier justice on the ice, especially in the early '90s version of the NHL, the early 2000s version. A lot of that's been legislated out, but we enjoyed, and a lot of young Canadian men became very famous in Dallas because we liked, that frontier style of justice that the sport handed out. So Dallas is the probably fourth biggest economic market in the country. It's kind of a glass and steel, high-rise downtown, and then a lot of, kind of suburbs going to the north. So there's probably about 7.5 million people. When we bought the rights to the Dallas Empire, which is a Call of Duty team, and the Dallas Fuel, which is an Overwatch team, we get a home market area that essentially goes from Waco in the south, which essentially splits the state in half. So we have North Texas, which is Baylor University or Waco, Texas, up through the University of Oklahoma, which is in a suburb of Oklahoma City. And then we have the width of Texas. And so there's probably about maybe 10 million people kind of in that home market area. And so it's a thriving economy, almost I don't say everyone is from somewhere else, but everyone moves to Dallas for economic reasons. It's because it's a huge employment center. There's probably more tech jobs in Dallas than any other city in the state of Texas. Austin has the brand of being the tech hub because that's the cultural tech hub of Texas. That's what University of Texas is, where the state capital is. It's more like maybe Adelaide, in Australia when F1, which is run in Austin, when people would come and visit, or we had V8 Supers one year, a lot would make the connection that Austin and Adelaide had a lot in common. And so probably Dallas and Sydney in some way, shape, or form would have some sort of connections, maybe a little more corporate town than some of the other towns, not quite as dense and not as old as the city as New York or LA or Chicago, which are the big three. But it's a Texas city that I think sometimes doesn't want to be seen kind of in Texas cowboy terms, where it's its sister city in the Metroplex. Fort Worth does really embrace that. But I think that it kind of misses out sometimes in trying to appear to be too metropolitan, because it's really, I think, a pretty evocative brand, to have the kind of cowboy brand and the Western brand.
Yeah, when we were there about a year and a half ago, we went to I can't remember what it's called, where the Grassy Knoll is. There's a museum dedicated
the
to
sixth
JFK
floor
now.
museum.
That's right. And I was having a chat to someone in there, and he kind of got a little bit offended, obviously a Democrat, and he said, no, that Dallas is actually a blue city. And that was kind of interesting to me. But Texas is pretty popular in Canada, where I'm originally from, as you might know, because Calgary does a lot of business with, well, at least with Houston, because of oil and gas.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
A lot of people who make their money in Calgary then choose to retire in Phoenix, Arizona, and they spend a lot of their winters down there and golf there. When we talk about Dallas, what do you, they talk about the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Is it three cities that have combined? Because you've really got Dallas, Arlington, and Fort Worth that have combined into this enormous city. And from my understanding, a lot of people are still actively moving to Dallas because it's the taxes are low. There's a lot of opportunity to do business there.
Yeah, it's really the state of Texas in general. Texas is on a good kind of young part of its product life cycle. So Texas is a no personal income tax state. It's a fairly inexpensive place to live. You can live well with the family for not a very high amount of money. And there's a lot of economic activity. So that combination of things is bringing a lot of people from other places who work here. And so there's a lot of large employers that are multinational companies that find this a very attractive place. Office rent is not too high. So a lot of people, like my kids, my middle school kids, and a daughter who's just graduated from grade school and middle school, a lot of their friends are from Asia, from India, and because their parents have come here, for economic opportunities. And so some of them might be born in America, but their parents, were born in other continents. And here it's an easy place to assimilate into, kind of the local culture, because there's not a big, there's not a lot of exterior. It's not a really beautiful place from a topography standpoint. No ocean, no mountains, things like that. So it's a lot of the social elements are event oriented, and so that's why the sports teams here are so popular. Because going to sporting events or being involved in your kids' activities are the biggest part of the social experience here. And then there's a lot of corporate activity here, and then that so that fuels a lot of the interest in kind of attending sports events or being fans of things, where people come from other places can come together and do something together. And so that's a lot of what Dallas offers.
So our teams, generally speaking, Dallas, as you said, is the participation and fan engagement typically higher per capita than other American cities?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I would say so. Some of the northeastern places, New York, Philadelphia, Washington, they are essentially multi-generational cities, to where your grandfather was a fan of the Giants, your father was a fan of the Giants, so you're going to be a Giants fan, and you all live, in the same city, maybe in a similar neighborhood, like that. So a lot of your fandom can be multi-generational. Here in new cities like Phoenix, kind of St. Louis is kind of is the most western eastern city. So once you get past Chicago and St. Louis, you're into all these new cities that people have essentially, America is a country to where people had to leave their tribes to come to America, right? So there's a little bit less tribalism here from ethnicity or things like that than you would find in the original origin countries.
Sure.
But then once you do that and you start settling in the eastern part of the country, then westward expansion and economic opportunity and now have been moving people, further west. And so the same thing happens again. You leave your familial tribe and you go to this new city. And so people tend to want to fit in and socialize where they end up, right? They want to find some reason to like the place they are. And a lot of them are still fans of their hometown team. So if you move from Chicago, you might still be a Cubs fan, but now you live in Phoenix. Well, the good news is they spend spring training in Phoenix, so you can get your hit there. But during the regular, then the rest of the year, you have to find someone to cheer for, right? And you want to have some connection to the local group. So it's either usually college sports or some version of pro sports that doesn't kind of conflict too much with your hometown favorite. So if you're a Calgary Flames fan, and you come to Dallas, a lot of our Dallas Stars hockey fans still had a first love somewhere. They moved here from Boston. They still love the Bruins, but they moved to Dallas. They wanted to like a team here. They weren't going to like the Cowboys because they still like the Patriots, and they weren't going to like the Mavericks because they still like the Celtics. But the hockey team, the culture of hockey was able for them to latch on and say, well, until they play the Bruins in the Stanley Cup Finals, then I'll just cheer for the Stars. And so they liked the sport of hockey enough to where they could create a second favorite team and then get to know the team over a period of years and then become, really tied into it. And so being the only NHL team in Texas, we didn't have to fight too much with other people. Like if you're the NBA near the Dallas Mavericks, you've got the Houston Rockets down the street, you've got the San Antonio Spurs down the street. Now you have New Orleans to the side, Oklahoma City above you, Denver not too far away, the Sun's not too far away. So from a geographic standpoint, there's not a lot of expansion in terms of geography that the Mavs can go in terms of creating fans. So then it's like you create these global brands around your players. And so now Mavericks I was in China on business not too long ago, and this young man from China Railway, 28-year-old, he loves Dirk Nowitzki, Well, that's because the NBA, you don't have to play in a New York or LA team in order to be a worldwide star. And so their affinity and fan creation can go through broadcast and transcend geographic areas. Hockey is a little bit more of a better sport live, so they tend to grow their fan base more organically through their geographic region. And so anyway, so that was an interesting process for us over many years.
I've noticed even over the last few years, I split I'm really a Canucks fan because I grew up in Vancouver until I was 10, but I know the Flames and their lineage through the late 80s, early 90s very, very well.
Well, I don't want to talk about Sergio Momesso in the 1994 playoffs and him batting that puck in the net. I still want to see Sergio Momesso.
I understand. I've got a soft spot for the Stars as well. I'm a big heavy metal and Pantera fan, and I love the party stories about those boys in that town. But even the NHL seems to be trying to dip their foot into the Chinese market as well. Over the last few years, they've been doing these preseason tours over there as well that I've been following. All right, so let's talk about your time. As I said, your role was the executive VP for sales and marketing with the Stars. You're with them for 18 years. Is that correct? So that's significant.
So I started out, I worked for a thing called the Dallas International Sports Commission. So Atlanta had just won the Olympics and the World Cup was coming to America in 1994. So all these cities were inspired by Atlanta's winning and said, well, we're as good as Atlanta, we should get in the game. And so they formed these nonprofit or attached to the Convention and Visitor Bureau groups. Dallas's was a nonprofit, and Tom Landry had just been fired from the Dallas Cowboys football team, and so they've got him on as the chairman, and they hired a young lady from Atlanta to be the president. So we were working on trying to maximize, to help the existing effort from the Convention and Visitor Bureau maximize Dallas-Fort Worth area's spot with the World Cup. During that process, and one of our board members was big into youth soccer locally. He became the chairman of Dallas World Cup Dallas, and he offered me a job to move and work on the World Cup in '94, and I accepted. But before it started, we had a guy named Roger Staubach, who was a Hall of Fame quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys for years, and won the Heisman Trophy when he was at the Naval Academy. You know, you have to be a pretty good football player to win the Heisman Trophy when you play at the Naval Academy. And he had retired and gone in from football and gone into corporate real estate and services for corporate relocations. And so the Minnesota North Stars were going to move to Anaheim. And a guy from Calgary, a guy named Norman Green, had left the Calgary ownership group and bought the Minnesota North Stars. And the group he bought it from had been granted the San Jose Sharks expansion franchise. And the NHL didn't want Minnesota to leave there. So the two guys who owned it, they said, listen, you go to San Jose. They wanted to move the Minnesota North Stars to San Jose. They said, don't do that. We'll find a new owner to keep it here. You guys will give an expansion team there. And so he tried to make it work for a couple of years. It wasn't going to work economically. So he got permission to move. And as he got to the goal line to move it to Anaheim, Disney came out with the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim movie, made $100 million, said, let's get into the NHL as a sports owner, team owner. That will help us be a promotional vehicle for our future Mighty Ducks movie franchises. And it'll be a way to, do that in a really cool, authentic way. So the NHL told Norm Green, you can't go to Anaheim, but you have to be some. Minnesota, so he ended up in Dallas.
Sorry, Geoff, I lost you there for a second. Can I just get you to repeat that part? So you said Disney made the movie. Obviously, they get the franchise, and I think your Wi-Fi dropped out there for a moment.
Oh yeah, sorry about that. So he couldn't move to Anaheim. Sorry, I'm going to turn off a couple of my devices here. And so he had to, it was January. He has to play in a new city in September, and he has to leave Minnesota. And so he, through a friend of a friend, called Roger Staubach. Roger Staubach called us. We picked him up at the airport. We toured him around Dallas, and we showed him the arena. We showed him an ice rink that he could have as a practice facility. And a couple of months later, had the contract signed, had the Dallas Mavericks agree to let him play in the arena that they had an exclusive lease for. And probably in mid-March of that year, they agreed to move the team. They're still playing in Minnesota at the time. Became the first employee ever of the Dallas Stars, on the ground working in Dallas, trying to find office space and work out details on the practice facility and things like that. So I started as a 25-year-old at a fairly low level, kind of the assistant to the owner. And then just through the next 18 years, just kept doing project after project. And the last 7 or 8 years, I was the executive vice president of sales and marketing. And it was the time of my life.
All right. So you were the first guy effectively appointed to work for the Stars at the time.
Yeah. I was the first ever Dallas Stars employee.
Interesting.
Unless you count the owner. I mean,
well, yeah, of course, but
he probably
as from an employee, I think
he probably doesn't want to be called an employee. But so yes,
I was going to say it would be a much different chat if I was speaking with the owner of the Stars.
Yes, exactly.
So for clarification, then, just in the terms of a corporate structure, then, I got to speak with a lot of people. So, a CEO, an MD, a president, an owner, a divisional head. You were the executive VP for sales and marketing. So in terms of a corporate structure, do you want to just provide an insight of where that puts you in the chain of?
So I was probably the number 2 guy to the president on the business side. Okay. So usually you have kind of the general manager and then a president of the team. So the competitive side is run by the general manager and the business side is run by the president. So I was the number 2 person because sales and marketing is the biggest part of the business. And so, so you're kind of, like I said, probably the number 2 guy on the business side. We had, really good teams. At the end of our term there, our owner had gone bankrupt and our team was going to be auctioned off and sold. So the end was not great, but, my 20-year-old son was my wife, who worked for the team also at the time. My 20-year-old son was in her stomach in the winning locker room in Buffalo as we were celebrating the Stanley Cup, which made her the only sober person in that entire locker room.
Fair enough. Can you take us through how this sort of works? So for a lot of us, specifically including myself, when the NHL offers a license for a franchise, I think one of the questions I always have is how does that work? Because the NHL will say, you watch the news from time to time, you'll hear about someone or a city saying they want to put in a bid to own a team.
Mm-hmm.
And then the NHL says, we're not putting up any franchise licenses right now. And
Mm-hmm.
then smaller markets, like you said, Minnesota, or I'm very familiar with,
Mm-hmm.
Quebec City and what they're still trying to re-enter.
Mm-hmm.
They won't grant them a license. And if the team
Mm-hmm.
is not doing well and they're losing money, oftentimes it's really difficult for them to offload the team. Could you just
Mm-hmm.
briefly explain to us how that sort of licensing works, why a new
Sure.
team can't come in and why they can't offload a team because of their license necessities, and how they off-sell that license?
So as opposed to an open system that has a promotion and relegation system like English soccer or something like that, you can form a club that, really, and, if you want in England, you can just form a club and start, apply to play in the lowest league, and then you could just win your way up, right?
Into the FA Cup and off you go.
Yeah, exactly. And then make and then be Leicester City and win the whole thing, and they make movies about you. And so in American sports, they tend to have a closed system in order to build kind of the asset value and to kind of pull revenues and decrease risk and increase the stability of the franchises. Now, the original NFL franchises were more, like the clubs that got built. The Green Bay Packers were, like an English soccer club that just comes together, and they were a meat packing, company that starts a football team. So the earliest American teams were like that. They were community-based, club-based, corporately based teams. But as they kept getting bigger and bigger, and the leagues became more successful, you needed a certain level of stability and certainty. And so by the teams coming together and forming a league, they could then kind of have a club membership. And so in the case with the NHL in the early 90s, you had these two guys who owned the Minnesota North Stars. They'd purchased it from, I forget who the Gunda brothers had purchased it from, but they were experiencing, they were not being successful economically in Minneapolis or in Bloomington, Minnesota. And so they wanted to move to this brand new market that was thriving called San Jose, California, which is kind of, a part of the tech Silicon Valley extended market. So the league has the right to grant them the rights to move or prevent them and try to organize a different buyer to come in. Because they can't have teams just moving wherever they want to, because you saw the result of that, like when the Cleveland Browns owner moved the team in the middle of the night going to Indianapolis because he got a better deal. And so when enough teams would move without the permission of the league and create havoc with the fans and the league, like the Brooklyn Dodgers moving to Los Angeles or the New York Giants moving to San Francisco in baseball, the league said, hey, we can't have owners just move wherever want to, right? Because we have to protect each other's markets, and we have to kind of have a more stable league. And so as they put those rules in, every league now, you need the owners to do like a two-thirds vote to allow you to move marketplaces. And sometimes, like the NFL, if you move from St. Louis to Los Angeles, they'll charge you a market acquisition fee, because they can either expand the league and sell that market for $500 million or something like that, or $1 billion, or they can let an existing team that has suffered economic hardship pay a transfer fee and move their team there, which they allowed both San Diego and St. Louis to both move to Los Angeles and share a stadium. And so they charged both of them, like, let's say, $400 million in order to access that marketplace. So when Minnesota's owner wanted to leave and they wouldn't let him, they arranged for a person who wanted to ascend to full ownership to come and buy the team from him. And then they granted the Minnesota owners an expansion franchise. I'm sure he had to pay something for it to start the San Jose Sharks. Now, the problem with the owner that they got to come into Minnesota and take over the Minnesota North Stars, a guy named Norm Green, very progressive, very smart, but he didn't have enough cash to weather downturns. And so he was kind of the last of the old style, you're a pro sports team owner because you're smart and you know how to kind of find the angles to improve your economics. Now you need a lot of money and the ability to do that. So when Norm started experiencing bumps in the road, he had kind of taken over that franchise and arena deal under duress. And so he had a kind of a right to lobby the league to allow him to move the franchise. Hey, I'll give it a go in Minneapolis or Bloomington, and if not, then you have to let me move it so I can save the franchise economically. So they gave him that right. The only thing they did was say you can't move to, I think, New York, Chicago, and Toronto. And so when he got the deal almost done with Anaheim and the building was almost finished, that's when Disney stepped in, and the NHL thought having Disney as a would be a great boon from a marketing standpoint. And so they told Norm, hey, sorry, that deal's off. You got to find a new home. And that's when he went and found Dallas. And then as we were helping him negotiate there, essentially now most cities have to put an economic stimulus package together to lure a team. But there, Dallas didn't offer him anything to come. It was just getting the Mavericks to unblock their arena exclusivity,
Right.
and then taking the future revenues that he would get from the activity in the building and using that to obtain a loan to renovate the building to allow hockey to be played there. And so Dallas got a great deal. They got the franchise to move there for no outlay of capital or no concessions in that regard. And so it was really great for Dallas. And then years later, the Dallas Mavericks and Stars combined with the city of Dallas to build the American Airlines Center. And that's been a huge economic windfall for all three parties. Okay. So the NHL, I think the NHL is at 31 teams right now. The last license they sold was to the Las Vegas franchise. I think it was like a $500 million license. And
they got Seattle coming in now as well.
They have Seattle coming in. I think it's the 32nd team and probably a similar price tag. And then so I would say that probably that's a pretty good number. 32 is usually a pretty good number when you have a league set up. I think the NFL's 32 teams. Major League Baseball is right around there too. But it is the leagues have to establish kind of a supply and demand, ratio. Like, at some point you don't want to have oversupply, because the more teams you have, the more jobs there are, the more competition is for top talent.
Yeah.
So that can drive salaries up. But you want to make sure that you have kind of the all the economic bases of the country well covered, and so you want to have a certain number of teams.
You mentioned that Dallas got in pretty cheap to buy the team, but when the license moves to a new owner, you said they might have to pay an additional fee to the NHL to take that over. Are they still responsible? Does the name of the company transfer? Do they take on all the previous debt of the other owner and have to pay all that out as well?
Yeah. So the city of Dallas doesn't own any part of the team. They just have the municipalities usually have the venue, have some ownership of the venue and some financing interest in the venue. And the reason they do that is because there's a lot of economic activity that flows through the venue. And it's also kind of a quality of community life issue for a place, gives them kind of bragging rights and makes, it's a very unique entertainment destination. So when the Stars got sold from Norm Green to Tom Hicks, he has to take on all the liabilities of it, and he creates a new corporate name to accept the license. But that's what he does. And then when the Stars and Rangers went through bankruptcy because both teams experienced some economic hardships, and Mr. Hicks didn't want to, couldn't afford to fund those teams anymore. The bankruptcy wiped out some of the debts, but not all of them. And so the new owners that came in to buy both individual teams, there's a big process where some amount of the debt associated with the team is fulfilled.
So you would still bring in administrators like you would in any other business to sort of tier the debt and determine who's a tier one sort of debtor, I guess. Right. Okay.
Yeah. And the league has a big interest in making sure that the teams stay solvent. Like they have a lot kind of the, like right now, Major League Baseball is the best example. Major League Baseball has a really, really difficult situation coming up because, if they can't play a full season, which they're probably not going to play a full season, and then they can't play with fans, they rely on, a lot of their revenue comes from, tickets, food and beverage, and merchandise, and
they've
sponsorships.
Got triple the stadium size and double the amount of games that they can play.
Ooh. Yeah. And so they have a real problem. I mean, every team has a problem on their hands, but Major League Baseball is in a real tough spot. And when you combine that with the fact that their player union has essentially negotiated the best possible position for the players in economic relationship to the owners. The owners are even in a worse position. The NFL still has a fairly owner-friendly economic setup with their players. They can cut players at any time, things like that. Baseball doesn't. The baseball players have the best end of that stick.
Yeah, we're seeing that down here at the moment where they're trying to negotiate with the Players Association. There doesn't seem to be a lot of give with them at the moment. So,
well, I mean, when you think about players, their competitiveness is, surely they're skilled, right? Of course they're skilled, but their competitiveness, they wouldn't be where they are without their competitiveness. And so when it comes to negotiations,
that carries over.
That's a pretty good feature to have for your union, is to have 99% of them be absolutely competitive. And baseball sometimes gets a bad rap for not being maybe as athletic of a sport as some basketball or football or something like that. But the trick there is that baseball is really a game of the mind being as strong as the body, because it's a game of dealing with 70% failure on the good side. And so they have to be really, really mentally strong. And so that makes their union very strong. Football is a very physically demanding game, which means short careers and big rosters to be able to have such a physical game. And so in football, there's probably, 50% of the roster that's going to be in the NFL for 1 or 2 years max. So they're easier to break from an owner's standpoint to get them to accept deals, because they all have the same vote on the economic deal. And most of them, if they lost one season, they could lose half their career. And in baseball, it's a much more skill-oriented game, to where if you can make it in the major leagues, you might make it for 10 years. And they're just mentally strong people.
I'd like to ask you again, just to take it back a step, when we're talking about teams in the cities that they play in. I know this is a big deal in Calgary right now, was as well, about the city funding a new arena. As the price of the dollar continues to go up, as you mentioned, it's very hard for a single owner to come in now and take a team. These are conglomerates of multiple different parties who are buying in. What's your thought on the requirements of a city to take on the bill to fund a sports team? Over here, we refer to that as private-public partnership. I don't know if the PPP, I don't know if they use the same term over there.
Yeah, they do. So generally speaking, in the 70s and 80s, it was they would refer to those deals, really, those facilities were more the quality of the facilities were not super high, and so they were kind of just one-use facilities just for the sports teams. So if you had an NFL stadium, you might use it 12 times a year. And so there's really no way to get any economic value out of that for a municipality. And so then making the investment in a football stadium or a big stadium like that, there really wasn't. It was more of a pride thing, more of an ego buy. In my prior job to this, when we were bidding in Hong Kong on a project, there's some really successful Australian firms that we were partnering with on that project in Hong Kong. And so Venues Live, I think, is their name, and they run a lot of places in Australia, and really, really smart people. And so what we were doing is we were combining kind of the new style of NFL stadium and all the facilities in it and development around it, and then taking a look at what they've done in Australia and doing kind of the same thing and trying to create the next generation of stadiums. They're really more almost like small cities to themselves, and that the amount of usage they get, like if you go to the Dallas Cowboys football stadium or the Minnesota Vikings new football stadium,
multi-purpose event,
they can have 600 events a year, right? Because you could have 6 events going on at the same time in the off season, and those people would never see each other in the same stadium, right? Because the clubs are spread out in different areas, and there's entrances and parking, and the facilities are designed to where you could have 5 or 6 events going on at the same time, and they would never see each other.
Do you think it's reasonable, though, for sports owners to demand of their city that they build them new facilities, which seems to be roughly every 20 or 25 years now?
Yeah. Well, now this current generation that's being now are probably going to be closer to 40 or 50-year um, lifespan buildings because they're more integrated developments around them as well. And so now, if you go to like the Chicago Cubs, they just put $750 million of their own money renovating Wrigley Field. And part of that is buying parts of the neighborhood around it and integrating kind of the facility with the neighborhood around it, because you can create your own district, right?
So these
And
urban
so,
renewal projects that are
yeah,
also
that's right.
taken on with
That's
them.
right.
Okay.
And so when you think about the competitors to that sort of municipal investment, you're talking about, like what are things that cities could do to renew cities or to renovate entire city, or to, like in Dallas, the reason the city of Dallas put in, I think, $150 million into the Mainline Center is because it was a dilapidated part of the front door of the city of Dallas that was a power plant that was no longer in use, and it was like a haunted house in a Scooby-Doo show. It was like
Okay.
literally a former landfill. It was, the whole area was contaminated. There was no activity. It looked like North Korea at night. It was terrible. And the city of Dallas wanted to take that 7-acre site on the front part of their city, and they wanted to do something great with it. But how many projects can renovate an area that's is that big, right? And do it at such a cost that you need to essentially take all the soil out. It took us 2 years we won a national award for clean up the downtown area 2 years in a row, because it took that long to clean the place up in order to build the district and the arena in that area. So cities are getting smarter and smarter and smarter about the economic investment that they do, because it's really unlocking a ton of investment from the owners as well and their business partners. And part of it is that the reason why player salaries have skyrocketed over the last couple of decades is in part because of media rights. But the other part is because owning a sports team has become um, a, a pride point for millionaires and billionaires that is so unique. It's like owning a Van Gogh or owning a huge yacht or something like that.
Who is the owner of the Chelsea Football Club? What's his name? Russian.
So is it the guy from Russia? Yeah, like Abramovich or something like that.
That's
so
right. And I remember hearing the same story they were saying, because he used to try to do business in Russia and couldn't meet the right guys. So now he starts flying them out to the game and gets that alone time with them.
And now he can get a meeting with anyone he wants.
Yes.
Right. But also the other thing, back to the players being competitive, you can't become a billionaire without being competitive. Maybe even unreasonably so. Right. And so these people, it's like they're the mental strength they have, the drive they have, the determination, the competitiveness is off the charts. Most people want to look at super wealthy people and say, oh well, they inherited it from somebody, or they did this, or they got lucky, or whatever. And sometimes all those things could be true to some degree, but they're smart, they are hardworking, they found something, they exploited it. I'm not saying they're all angels. I'm not saying any of them are angels, but they're so competitive that then this is a level up, and that's one of the reasons why having a closed system knocks up the price of the teams, is that once you win and become a billionaire in business, there's only so many things you can do. You can be like Elon Musk. I want to go explore Mars. Okay, good. He's channeling his stuff there. Some people want to, enhance the university they went to. Some people want to become pro sports owners. Some people want to try to cure hunger in Africa. Everyone's got a thing they do, but they usually can't turn their brain off, right? Like their brain is going 24/7.
They just have to divert it into another task.
Something, right? And actually, the more challenging it is, almost the better. So now you have this fixed system of salary cap, all these teams together, and they're all fighting each other's teams. And then you look at the owners, and they're like, they're really competitive. It gives them an outlet for it, right? And a certain amount, like you said, a certain amount of clout, a certain amount of uniqueness, a certain amount of identification, and it makes them a very rare person that they're a professional sports owner in the world, which there's not 1,000 of them.
Fair enough. Let's talk about you a little bit. You meant, I think you said you came into the organization at 25 as the first employee.
Yeah.
Were you? I mean, I recently watched a movie on the biography of Gordie Howe, and they talk a little bit about the WHA. So I know that there were teams back then, but as an outsider looking in,
Sure.
Dallas immediately doesn't strike you as a hockey town,
Yeah.
and certainly in
Well,
terms of the
Dallas
weather.
and Fort Worth had great minor league teams back in the old days, back when there was only 6 NHL teams. Both Dallas and Fort Worth had minor league teams back, and the physical nature of the NHL that time was a big hit in both of those cities. I was not a hockey fan. Oklahoma City, I grew up in Oklahoma City, and they also had a hockey team. And so at the end of every year, our youth football teams, they would take us to a hockey game so our dads could drink copious amounts of beer and all the kids could run around the concourse.
When they still had 10-cent beer night and all those sorts of promos?
Yes. I mean, our dads would happily pay $1 if they had to. But I don't think the kids ever watched 1 second of the game, and the dads just use this excuse to go drink beer. So, which is not a ton has changed, I guess, since then. But so I'd seen it a little bit, been around it a little bit, but I didn't know anything about it. And I just was choosing between that and working for the World Cup, and I didn't know anything about soccer either. I was a traditional football, baseball, basketball fan.
Okay.
But what I did want is I wanted a career in sports, because the old saying is, if you can work at something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I don't know that that's exactly true, because there's sometimes I feel like I'm working, but I think what I always knew was when I got out of graduate school, I had an opportunity. My family was bankrupt. We had no money. I was sleeping on my brother's couch, and didn't have $1 in my name, didn't have a car, didn't have anything. And so I had a choice between a fairly good paying job and an internship with the Dallas International Sports Commission. And it would pay $5 an hour, and the other job would pay me like $75,000. And so I asked 3 people their advice on what I should do. I asked my older brother, who I was staying on his couch, so that seemed like a fair person to ask. He told me to take the sports job. He said, listen, the corporate job will always be there. Those jobs will always exist, but you got to take your shot. I asked my rich uncle, who died recently, but he had a fabulous career with ExxonMobil, had become a multimillionaire, had taught international business at the University of Texas for 25 years upon retirement. Really just a wonderful, wonderful person. He said, take the real job. He said, sports jobs are kind of rich kid jobs. You're not a rich kid. You need money. You don't have $1. Your family's bankrupt. Take the real job and start building the life for you and your future family. And then I asked my father, and he said, you have been insanely interested in sports since the day you were born. He goes, if anyone was ever meant to have a career in sports, it's you. So take that job and unlock your best self. And so that's what I did. They were all right. My uncle was right too. I didn't have $1, and working in sports is not the path to financial riches. But my father and brother, who knew me better than anybody, were also right, which is it unlocked my interest level and my best effort. And so it's made for a good career for me and my family.
Okay. In terms of the game, I mean, it's I assume that you ultimately became a fan, but what was it like having to market this game in that area? And especially, we still hear about how NHL can't crack the big 4 in the US. What are the issues that you see around it? And I guess that probably would have been the initial things that you had to overcome as you moved through the roles in marketing.
Yeah, so the NHL and Dallas were a good fit in that, especially in that era of the NHL, there was it has a bad name now, but there was a lot of clutching and grabbing and hooking and, play. And so that allowed the smarter, older, more talented, willful players to have longer careers. So like people like Guy Carbonneau, we obtained him late in his career, and he was had unbelievable impact on our franchise. Brett Hull, was a great player for us at the end of his career, former Calgary Flame. And we had players like Mike Modano, who could play in any era. We had very physical players like Derian Hatcher, who could scare Frankenstein's monster if the two of them met in an alley. So he was a very tough human being. And at about 6'5" and 225 pounds, he was also the smallest person in his family.
Are you saying it took a little bit about the Broad Street Bullies from the old Philly story?
Well, we didn't go maybe that far, but we had a guy named Shane Churla who was our fighter. And before every fight, he never wore an undershirt, or he never strapped his shoulder pads down. And so they made the rule where you had to attach your jersey to a fighting strap before Shane Churla. And he would whip off his gear and take off his helmet so there's nowhere for the opponent to grab him. And then he would just speed bag his opponent. And women did not mind that. They thought Shane was cute, and they liked that very much because that sort of the female fans, people, oh, well, if you want female fans, you can't have fighting. Not true. They liked the, again, I'll say it again, the frontier justice side of the players was popular with the female fans. So our marketing plan in Dallas was really one of sampling. It was get people to the games. And the genius of Jeff Cogan, who was the original vice president of sales and marketing, there was, don't treat hockey like it's some shrine. Treat it like it's going to be the most fun entertainment experience that they've gone to that year. So the music he played, he pioneered the use of putting video clips in the game entertainment to kind of highlight the context of the tension or the drama of the game at the time, which was unlicensed. And the head of Disney came to one of our games against the Mighty Ducks and asked me who we had talked to in his company to obtain the license to play those video clips. And that's when I excused myself and abandoned him, so I didn't have to answer the question, because the answer was nobody, and they still don't do it. But the entertainment level was off the charts. Jeff Cogan did an amazing job of not treating it like a religious experience like Toronto and Calgary and Vancouver and all those Canadian cities did. They treated it like it was, church on Sunday. And Jeff Cogan treated it like it was a rave. And so a lot of people had no idea what was going on, and they loved it.
Well, that seems to be what the XFL has tried to do when they thought about 2.0 of it coming back.
Yeah. And I think actually they had a shot until the COVID pandemic hit. But I think the thing that makes basketball easy to translate is it's so simple to understand. The reason that hockey can't bust out of its place is because it's a swirling game that's hard to understand, and the faster it's played, the harder it is to see the manifestation of the talent and the skill of the players. So one of the problems hockey has is, as the goalies' pads have gotten bigger and the goalies have gotten bigger, that it's harder and harder to score. And so a lot of the scores in hockey are ricochets off of a bunch of players in front of the net. Some of it might be the defenders who are trying to keep the forwards out of the way. And so a sport that relies on fluky scoring and not the manifestation of skill, like the passing game in NFL shows or basketball shows with its distance shooting and high flying slam dunks and things like that, or baseball, which, everything is a skill in baseball, the pitch, the hit, the running catches and things like that. Hockey is played so fast in such a swirling area and such a swirling way that it's hard to show the skill of the individual players. They are amazingly skilled, and they're doing things at an incredibly high speed. But when they do all of it to get in front of the goalie, and then the goalie's a 6'6" guy who lays down in the butterfly and blocks the entire net, there's nowhere to shoot, then they have to try to bounce it in off somebody. And that's ultimately unsatisfying to fan bases and hard to broadcast.
Did you ever have the issues going back to, I want to say, the mid to late 90s? I remember when Fox Sports picked up hockey. I remember they had the blue puck because there was the issue of people having trouble following the puck. Was that something, were you made aware of that, or was that a legitimate issue of new fans at the time, that they couldn't track the puck?
Well, yes. And it's hard to introduce the sport to new people, and they don't understand how to find the puck. But it's like in baseball. If you're an American baseball fan, you don't try to track the ball as it's being hit into the outfield. You watch the outfielder run, and by his body language, you can tell where the ball is, right? So if you go to a baseball game, you can tell you're in a baseball city or not a baseball city when there's a high fly ball and the outfielder's standing by the wall patting his glove, that means he's going to catch it, right? Because he's standing there looking at it, it's going to come right to him. If he just turns and looks at the outside wall, the outfield wall, that means it's a home run because he's just looking at it and it's gone. Well, if you're a new fan, they always cheer for the long fly ball because they don't realize they're watching the ball. And so they, it might be a home run. And that guy's 15 feet in front of the fence and catches it. And they're like, oh, that was so shocking that it didn't make it. And you're like, okay, noob, you know what you're doing. Well, in hockey, the broadcast ratings have never been higher than when you had the augmentation of the puck. The
Really?
problem is, it's the highest national ratings they've ever had. The problem is that when you force people to look at the puck because you augment it, it makes
you
them
miss
nauseous.
everything else.
Because it just is going so fast and whatever, and it becomes like you start to get sick to your stomach, and you don't look at the rest of the game, right? And so what they should have done is not just, which the NHL always does, is overreact to criticism, especially by the old school guys, and then because they treat it still like a religion. Instead of innovating, the NHL is terrible at innovation, generally speaking, because they have part of the group that is in new places and needs innovation, part of the group that's in a place to where they hate innovation, right? Because it's such a multi-generational, religious type of experience. And the league is run kind of in a power sharing group with the most powerful people at the team level are the general managers, not the business side people. Okay. And so they don't want the competitive purity of the sport. Any changes to that to come in from essentially the marketing people or the broadcast people. They want it just to be kind of a natural evolution of the purity of the sport. And so the league office doesn't have enough swag or power because they don't create any revenue, right? Like the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, they have all these massive media contracts coming in through the league level, and that gives the league office a lot of power. The NHL doesn't have that because it's not popular enough, because it can't create an audience that want to watch it on broadcast. And so that makes a weak league office because the teams who all own part of the league essentially are supporting the league office, and they're trying to keep them weak. They don't want them to take a lot of money and reinvest it in initiatives because they have no experience that that's really going to work. And so
that's a good thing, though, isn't it? If each team has more anonymity over and autonomy over what they can do, rather.
It is, unless you're trying to do some sort of collective initiative to innovate and grow audience on a scale, right? It's like the Toronto Maple Leafs have incredible power in the league. Good for Toronto fans, good for the Toronto owners. But why isn't there a second team in Toronto? New York has two teams.
Yeah, that seems to be on the table now, though, from what we're hearing.
It might be, but also what happens is that a lot of the most powerful groups don't want things to change, right? Like they have it good right now, so why would they want much change there? And so the sport, even like when I was there and we were trying to get the center ice logo to be a more interesting design, they were like, well, you can't mess with the red line that goes through the center ice area, because how will the linesman be able to call a two-line pass or icing if they don't have that? And then you look at the other sports that have, like basketball has an over and back issue with the half court, and you see them choosing the absolute line, having a blank area on either side of it and messing up the mid court logos, or making those look worse because they're afraid the referee won't be able to call over and back to the millimeter. No, because they realize they're an entertainment source. Like for teams, and esports has it the same way. For every sports league, they have to decide what they are. Are you a source of entertainment that's based on competition, or are you a competition that just does the best you can on entertainment, right? And the NHL has always come on the side of, we're a serious competition and we'll just do the best we can on the entertainment side. And they've made strides here and there, but that's one of the reasons why they will always have kind of a place in the ranking of popularity of professional sports in the world.
Can I ask your overall impressions of Gary Bettman? He seems to be overly loathed by hockey fans, but my understanding of him is that the reason why he's kept his place is he does a very, very good job of shielding team owners from the abuse that he seems to absorb himself as being that shield, which is what kept him instead for so long.
Yeah, I would say that Gary, you're not going to keep your job like that for, I don't know what it's been, 30 something years without being, solid at your job. And I would say that Bettman has been a kind of cautious, solid caretaker. He has shown a lot of respect to the traditional power brokers in hockey, and he has, I think, been solid but unspectacular. And so I would give him I'd probably give him a B minus, something like that. Which hockey doesn't have the margin to really to make mistakes like some of the other leagues do too. So so I would say that I don't know that Bettman's been a bad mix for the NHL. You could say that Adam Silver has done an unbelievably good job, but he also has a little bit of he got set up pretty well by David Stern, and I think he's been a great commissioner ascending to that situation. But there was a lot to work with too. So and Roger Goodell has some very positive things about him, and then obviously some very kind of negative things. But the commissioner is not a role that I think you're ultimately going to win a lot of popularity contests with, because if you have 31 or 32 teams, you never ever probably have had 32 teams agree on one issue.
Anything.
Ever.
What's very interesting to me is that you seem to frequently be referring to how small the NHL is. As an outsider looking in, it seems like a massive organization. Obviously, as Canadian as well, I know that it's entrenched in our culture, but
Sure.
There's only 6 of those teams remain up north. They're all in the U.S. You had talked about allowing teams to have, I guess, allowing the entertainment side to come out through. Are there any other sort of key issues, or I guess in your opinion, a 1, 2, 3 step policy where you would say, like, this is really what they need to do to make them more competitive in the American market?
Well, I think that I don't want to come up listen, sometimes you seem like you're being harsh towards things you care about deeply. I think the NHL has done a fine job, of growing the sport, and I think Dallas in particular, and Jim Lights in particular, has done an amazing job of essentially long game investment in youth hockey in the Dallas area. And now for 30 years, they've, out of necessity at the beginning, creating youth skating rinks, has created a situation where there's, like when I went to the Winter Classic and there's 85,000 people, at the Winter Classic matchup between the Nashville Predators and the Dallas Stars, it brought a tear to my eye, because they sold out those tickets really, really quickly. And, there was, there's times, not to pick on the Winnipeg Jets, but, when you have a Tuesday night game against the Winnipeg Jets, you're not necessarily running out of tickets real quickly. Yeah. And I think that the kind of the work that the Western teams have done to build up their markets has been a lot of hard work, and they've done a really, really good job with it. It just takes, generations in some cases. I think the thing that disappoints me the most is when we had the lockout and we lost the entire, I forget what season it was now, 2007 or something like that season. I can't remember, 2005 maybe.
I want to say 4 or 5. I thought it was.
Maybe it was 2004, 2005, something like that. And so the Stars have a broadcaster named Daryl Ray, who's a really talented guy. And so we had a little bit more time on our hands than we wanted. And so I was asking Daryl, and it's like, listen, if we wanted to try to really improve the broadcast, what would you suggest? And he said, well, the greatest hockey broadcast that I ever saw was the Miracle Ice when the U.S. team beat the Soviets. And I'm like, yeah, but it's because the U.S. beat the Soviets. He said, no. He said, it's not it at all. He said, it's because they played in such a small arena and the tickets were worth, $10. So they didn't care about the seats. So they had a really low center broadcast, kind of follow camera, and
almost at ice level more. Is it
almost ice level?
Yeah,
so,
right.
So when we started looking at it with our executive producer of the broadcast for Fox Sports, we had a partnership with Fox Sports Southwest. we said, listen, what we need to do is we need to take the off-ice officials, instead of having 3 or 4 people there, have one person there, relocate the other ones to a back of the lower bowl end zone, just have one off-ice official that the officials can talk to, and then they're on headset with the other ones, and then essentially take the back glass away from that area and the front glass away from that area, and like decrease.
Oh, so you guys were the innovators of sticking the camera right in the glass.
Well, we wanted to have because the main follow camera is on the back of the lower bowl, and so what we wanted to do is take it right behind the penalty boxes and like lower the back glass in the penalty boxes and the scores table and bring it in, and or even just take the penalty boxes kind of further out, and then have like the camera be able to go real low follow camera, and that way you have a speed camera that goes from
almost like those tracking ones you see on the offside line,
right?
In
and
rugby
then
or football.
You could also have one come down from above. They tried a rail cam, which doesn't really work very well along the dashboard glass, but we wanted to, and we would give up probably 70 prime seats that you charge a lot of money for, but at some point the NHL has to say, listen, if we want to, the only way to scale revenue is through broadcast, through digital products or broadcast. And so at some point they get golden handcuffs on the expensive seats and those center sections, lower bowl area, and it prevents them from making broadcast improvements of some significant different way to broadcast in a more intimate way, to take the live experience of seeing it to broadcast, right? And it doesn't have to be linear broadcast. It can be allowing, I'm sure there's been a lot of technological improvements in their website and things like that, broadcast products since I left. So maybe they do all these already, but I think they have to think of it, instead of just the value of the tickets they'd be losing or the obstruction of the cameras or things like that. They need to be thinking seriously about how they can get the broadcast and digital viewer inside of the rink, with the players, because they need to be able to slow the game down to make it more interesting. But you don't want to slow the game down, so you have to bring them closer and have different angles. That would be my advice.
There's a few things to unpack there as we get more into like how you run the business and market for it. I just wanted to take a small segue, because you had talked about your admiration for what Western teams had been able to do. From a fan perspective, there's always the conversation of Western teams, specifically in the Pacific division, and this is more of an actual an in-game question, but a lot of people perceive the Pacific division to be the weakest out of any of them compared to the Atlantic, because when it comes to points, they always seem to be about 20 points down on the end of the season. Any insights that you have to that? Only because some people have said, if you look at their travel schedules are much worse. It's not like the Atlantic where they hop on a bus. Do you know anything about that, or has that ever been something that's been presented to you?
So I think Minnesota and Dallas and Vancouver, Calgary, all usually they have by far the most miles that they fly. And the Eastern Conference teams have kind of a monopoly on close travel, and they have no interest in giving that up. And why should they? It's a nice advantage for them in terms of lifestyle. Their players spend the night in their own beds quite a bit more than Western teams do. But but I also think that in hockey you can have long periods of time to where the power shift can happen, and so you had an era, especially when I was in there, where Los Angeles and Anaheim and San Jose and Dallas were all really good teams for a long time. It was just a knife fight. Thank God we had the Phoenix Coyotes we could all beat up on. But now, if you're really, really good for a long period of time, sometimes you go through an extended dearth. And so that sometimes right now, like Anaheim and LA, I think are not very powerful now. And Dallas has had a little bit of a resurgence with Ben and Sagan. Jamie Benn's looking like one of the best fifth-round draft picks in the history of the world, right? John Klingberg, another fifth-round pick. Like, thank God for Les Jackson and his fifth-round magic. If Les Jackson was that good in the first round, he would be in the Hall of Fame already. But so I think the Western teams in the Pacific Division, the travel certainly has something to do with it. But I think that sometimes it's just cyclical, because when I was in the league, LA was really good, winning Stanley Cups. San Jose was really, really good for a long period of time. Anaheim was really tough with Getzlaf and Perry and those guys. And so I think it's a little bit more cyclical. And then also sometimes the economic power of the teams determines how quickly they can reload, because how quickly they can, buy out their mistakes or, things like that, or acquire players in different ways can restock their pond a little bit faster.
When you talk about that and sort of the ability for them to invest in that, one of the conversations that always comes up is, I don't know what the time period is, but you can invest in a team, they stay good for a decade as their team matures, then their players start hitting that 33, 34 years old, they start dropping off, and that's where you've got to start sort of picking it up in that roller coaster. Is it easy enough to try to track? Because you hear about some teams really missing their rebuild, where that they bring in a new coach or someone, or they decide with the GM, they go, look, we're going through rebuild, and that rebuild seems to last for another decade, and they have a modicum of success.
Well, just even look at, the Klingberg and Ben picks, which I think were maybe a year apart back in the day. I mean, they're 5th round picks. You don't expect those two guys to become all-stars for a team. So when how well you draft and how lucky you get in the draft is enormously important. And then does your culture and system get the best out of players? The people you draft, you get the best out of them is another, is another interesting element. Some teams always seem to get lucky, and there's a reason they get lucky. It's because they have a good system, they have a lot of stability, they make good choices. And so, Philadelphia was great for a long period of time when I was in the league, because they had a group of people that were, really doing good work. And so they would make smart trades. They would pick, people that fit their system, and they had a strong internal culture of achievement that had high expectations, but supported the people in making those, achieving those things. And then sometimes Pittsburgh gets, wins the lottery and beats Anaheim to be able to pick Sidney Crosby. And so sometimes those things happen. So I think in the Last Dance documentary with Michael Jordan, the general manager, then Jerry Krause, gets a lot of heat for saying that organizations win championships. And what he said was that players and organizations win championships. And I think that's fair, that the players certainly are the ones who win, but the support they get from the organization is very meaningful. And so when you see the Chicago regime change and ownership change, the front office change, and then they draft exceedingly well, but then that group together, they support them with a good supporting cast and good resources and good coaching, and they win, multiple Stanley Cups. If you had terrible ownership and no support and those same players, they probably wouldn't have won the Stanley Cup, because those other things are really meaningful, and just even in the psyche and the camaraderie and the culture of the team is important in that regard. Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel supported? So anyway, so I think it's a combination of those things.
All right. So your role as EVP Sales and Marketing, you talked about how you're sort of second in command. Just to dip into that, a lot of people aren't going to really fully understand what that means. Again, when I think of a hockey team, you've got your branding, as you said, you've got your television revenue, you've got your ticket sales, you've got levels of your merchandising, you've got your corporate entertainment, corporate boxes. How many channels, or sort of how does your role oversee all those different channels of marketing and revenue?
Yeah. Well, when I worked for the Stars and I was in that role, they usually, so right now they have a CEO, a president named Brad Alberts, and then they have a VP of marketing named Dan Stuckel. So the VP of marketing would handle all the branding, the game entertainment, broadcast integration, things like that. And then they have a head of sales, so sometimes it's the head of both sponsorship and ticket sales, sometimes just one or the other. So when I was with the Stars, we had a president, and then I was the head of sales and marketing. So I had marketing, branding, game entertainment, and then I had all sales, sponsorship, ticket sales, suite sales, things like that. And so now they're set up as a little bit different, in that they have a CEO, a president, and then a head of marketing and a head of sales. And so they have a very talented group there now. And again, a slightly different setup than we had when I was there. But, we were in charge of, sponsorship sales, sponsorship activation, suite sales, club seat sales, ticket sales, game entertainment. We introduced the Ice Girls when I was there, which, you couldn't have wiped my grin off my face with a sandblaster when that rolled out. We had this
Um,
wonderful vice president of marketing named Brooke Fendrick. And so she came to me and said, "Hey, we want, New York Islanders started this group, and we had a bunch of guys in sweatpants, rink rats who were cleaning up the ice during breaks." And she said, "I want to replace them with beautiful girls who come in and skate and do that." And I was like, "You're gonna get me killed. You're gonna get me fired. So no." She goes, "Just don't say no yet. Just let me start the program and show you what it's like and whatever." So I went to my boss and said, "Hey, we're thinking of looking at what the Islanders did and whatever." And he's like, "Well, just don't get yourself fired." And I was like, "Oh." So I saw the program. If a guy had come to me and said he wanted to start the program, I probably wouldn't have done it. But Brooke was wonderful and very family oriented, and so she said she kind of outlined her vision for it, that she wanted these very athletic, attractive young ladies to do this, and then it evolved later into having also an arena dance team, kind of more like the style of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders or their dance squad, and so what I didn't understand at the time, because I was looking at them from a 35-year-old male, 40-year-old male standpoint, is when I had a family and then I would take my daughters to the game who were probably 6, 7, 8 years old during that era. They loved them. They loved seeing these beautiful women dancing and on the ice and beautiful uniforms, and for them the role of active participating females in the experience was really meaningful,
Really?
because they grew up on Disney princess movies, and they like kind of the princesses as the heroes and involved, and they all have beautiful dresses on, and they all are beautiful girls, and whatever kind of way they're presented, and they loved it. And so it gave me kind of a whole new perspective on kind of the diversification of kind of role models and kind of characters in it. So we made our PA guy a character, we made our music disc jockey a character, we made our national anthem singer into a permanent position, and made her a game hostess as well. And so we were dimensionalizing the people that you would, when you came to games, the amount of people you would see were not just the players and the coaches who you have a limited amount of access to, but we were dimensionalizing, adding all these other characters to it that made it feel more like a family. Like when you walk into a restaurant, everyone there, they know your name, making it more like a family. And so all those people really became famous in their own way with our fans, because they had a lot more engagement opportunities with the fan base in that regard. In the same way with our broadcasters, the broadcasters became as famous as most of our players, which was really a great asset for the Stars too. So I would say that when you go there and you see sponsors and advertising and suites and things like that, you've got a lot of hardworking people spend a lot of time at kind of building custom packages for all the corporations in the region in both advertising and hospitality. And the NHL probably relies more on hospitality in that mix than most professional sports do, because the level of entertainment and the live experience is a very crucial part of the relationship that gets developed between the sport and the fans.
Do you think hockey has any particular benefits over the other big four sports? Like when you talk about the entertainment portion of it.
Yeah, I think that the players are a great product, and I remember when the shootouts. Do you remember when they instituted the shootouts? Kind of started that as a way to ending games. We had a guy named Bill Guerin, and we also had a guy named Sergei Zubov, who was the best player that Stars have ever had, is Sergei Zubov. And so when we started the shootouts in the trial preseason, I went to Zubov and I said, "Can you make it more interesting than just going in and doing the penalty shot?" He goes, "Well, what do you think?" I said, "What if you had a lit cigar? What if you were smoking a lit cigar?" Because Zubov smoked all of the time. In between periods. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't smoke on the bench in between shifts. But I said, if you had a cigar in your mouth and came in and deked him, could you score while smoking a cigar? And he's like, "Oh yeah, easy." We were never brave enough to try it, but I always would have loved to have seen the reaction from the fans as Zubov skate out to center ice with a big cigar in his mouth. But Guerin, I said, "Hey, can you take your helmet off?" Because Guerin had this great, head of hair, and one of the problems you have in broadcasting hockey is they have these helmets on, right? And so that's one of the advantages golf and tennis and the NBA have, is you can see the face of the competitors in these great close-up shots with their intensity. And the hockey mask, especially with the visors, really detract from that. Obviously, football has the same problem. American football has the same problem. So I asked Guerin to take his helmet off when he went to take his penalty shot, and he did in the preseason during the test. And the NHL had a rule out the next morning at 9 a.m. saying that it's a player safety issue because you could trip, taking a shot and ram your head in the board and die. So there was never ever to be another, example of the helmet coming off. And they're not wrong, but it's just, it's one of those things that, people were able to play hockey for many, many years without a helmet on, and they were able to protect themselves in a way that, could happen. And I think in a controlled environment like a shootout, they could probably still do it, but it's just the liability associated with the league and what the players are now. It's just too much to let anyone take that sort of risk. So I think the answer is the players are the best product. And so now the question of how to best, take advantage of their assets as the players in a digital way at scale is, I think, the best way to grow the game.
How is income ranked when it comes to that sort of marketing? Obviously, it's the TV deals, I assume, that drive the most amount of money for the clubs overall that gets handed to them. No, it is certainly for sport down here, the big TV deals. But so how does that compare with ticketing, merchandising?
Yeah, so probably for the Canadian teams, ticket sales are number one, and the media deals in the NHL probably might come in number two. So it'd probably be ticket sales, sponsorships, hospitality, media. Media's in there somewhere. Media's not bad, but they just have never been able to get the rights fees, in the NHL, just because they can't draw a big enough audience to it, because it's just a little bit too niche of an audience. So ticket sales is number one.
Okay. Does when we talked about moving the club over from Minnesota to Dallas, considering the team then has to take on the debt, does any of the merchandising sales that were with the old North Stars organization, do you guys get a percentage to take that on, or does that return to NHL licensing?
Well, I think the end of the North Stars essentially kind of retained with the league. When you create a new brand for the Dallas Stars, now the leagues retain the old brands. There's probably not a tremendous amount since Minnesota's new team that came in, created their own brand with the Minnesota Wild. There's probably not much, historic memorabilia sold from the Minnesota North Stars. So, and also merchandise isn't as profitable unless it's really, really scaled. Like you have to sell a lot of something in order to get the cost of goods down. And that's why if you really wanted to make a lot of profit, you would have to create digital products, right? So then you have the cost of developing the digital product, but then selling, 1 or 10,000 of a digital product is, same cost, right? So then the margin just shoots up. So so then really if you're, and I'm sure they do it to some degree now, but really what you would want is, something, that's why, why video games have such an advantage in that regard, is that microtransactions inside the games. Activision Blizzard sells $1 billion of digital products inside of the game for the participants to use as they personalize their, ray gun or their charms or whatever. And so if you, from a professional sports standpoint, you have to find things that have essentially a low cost of scaling it or making it of a certain size, and something that can be ubiquitously spread. So if you have a fan in Finland, like Klingberg for the Stars is Swedish, right? Well, the time difference makes the broadcast rights that the NHL will ever get in Sweden, minimal, kind of hampered, right? But if they could develop a reliable, kind of cool, collectible, digital, set of products that, usually the cell phone would be the way to go there, that people could express their fandom through, kind of, either a membership or some club thing to where they get to collect these digital products that are kind of low or fixed cost to produce, but easy to sell. They need to figure out some sort of scalable, low cost, high margin product like that to sell would be my guess.
Okay. You talked about the lockout earlier. Now we've got this COVID virus happening. Just give us an insight into the measures or the precautions that a team has to do to keep itself financially viable when there's no more revenue stream happening.
Yeah, so that's when all the teams come back. The NBA and the NHL, it's a little bit easier because you'd be going essentially straight into the playoffs, and the playoffs have kind of their own economic sharing setup that's different than the regular season. So that will be a little bit easier. Some of the leagues, when they come back, will announce that we might play, some amount of regular season games or something like that. And the reason they'd want to do that is they'd want to collect more of their local TV contracts. Because those are, especially in the NBA, are very lucrative. The NHL, not bad in the NHL, but the local TV revenue is actually more than the national TV revenue in the NHL, because localized you can build a decent fan base, and so
regular advertising plans and all that sort of thing around it as well.
And also it's just it's easier to kind of build that market locally than have the NHL is a more tribal thing. In Canada, it's not, because the sport is so immensely popular. But in America, they're fans of a team, not the sport. So in Canada, you can have Hockey Night in Canada on and get great ratings. But Hockey Night in America, you're not going to get it. Right. Because I remember some of the studies they did when I was still there. One time we had a good team, and we lost in the conference finals to Detroit. And God, I hated Detroit. And so then we're having our end of the year parties, and the Stanley Cup finals are on TV, and we have our end of the year party, and not one single person out of the 100 people that worked for the Dallas Stars went to the other room and watched the game, because we were so pissed. We were so angry. We hated the Red Wings. I don't even remember who they played. Maybe the Flyers as well. I don't know. I didn't care. But no one could emotionally walk into the other room and see that game. They would have rather have cut a finger off than go watch those jerks. And I'm sure they're all great people, and whatever. But it's just it's such a tribal, emotional game that when your team's out, you're out. In Canada, it's not that way. In Canada, the Stanley Cup playoffs can build to a crescendo of audience because you're seeing great hockey. In America, once your team's out, by God, you hate every other team. Fair enough. And you're not scaling.
In 2007, the All-Star game came there. Do you, working for Dallas, what becomes your responsibility versus the league, mandating where the game's going to be?
Well, we had to bid for it and win it. And so you have to essentially develop a package. When we had the election for the arena, which was the election for the arena, I had a public vote for the citizens to vote whether they wanted to, fund a portion of it. In the end, the city, like I said, it ended up funding $150 million out of $420 million. So the teams put a lot into it. But there had to be a vote. And so as a part of the benefit package, both the NBA commissioner and the NHL commissioner, Allison said, hey, if the citizens vote, they build this new arena, we'll both bring our all-star games to Dallas. As an added economic benefit and cultural benefit for the city, to say thank you for voting for it and contributing to it. And so the guy at the NHL at the time who was in charge of special events, his name was named Frank Sapovitz, and he eventually went on to win the Super Bowl for a decade. And so I called him and said, okay, well, your commissioner promised us the All-Star game, so when do we get the All-Star game? He's like, it doesn't work like that. You got to bid for it, you idiot. You don't just get to call me and, book it, I was like, oh, well, okay, well, but, send me the bid book and whatever. So the first time it came out, we filled it out. We bid for it and didn't get it. And so the next time, so then you have to wait a couple of years. So then the next time they're going to do another package of, I think they're going to bid out another couple of All-Star games. I just called him and said, Frank, I'm not going through this again. You tell me what a winning bid from Dallas looks like. Tell me what we have to do to make you thrilled to death to pick us, and then tell me what that is. And so he said, well, if I were you, I would do X, Y, and Z. And so I went and worked with the mayor and the different hotels that we needed and the arena, and everybody else says, okay, here's the winning bid. If we do these things, you have to give us you have to give us 120,000 square feet at the Dallas Convention Center for free. That's what they need to put the NHL, special event on there. So we're gonna give them do this for free. So that's what we're gonna do. And so I'd get the mayor and the city manager of the city of Dallas, all these people to sign off on that, the director of the convention center. And luckily, the NHL All-Star games in like January, so there wasn't a lot of other things to compete with it. Then to go to the Lowe's Anatole and say, okay, we're gonna give them the entire hotel, and we're going to give them all the rooms at this rate, and we're going to give them 50 rooms for free and all the additional space for free, and that's what we're going to do to get this event. And they're like, okay, we'll do it. And I had the city Dallas Convention Visitor Bureau with me, and we went and got that done. And then we went to the arena and said, okay, if we want it here, we have to do this, 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 and this. And then the team, we have to do this, 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 and this. And we had it, and we had a great event. And then NHL controlled the event. They got it done in economic terms and the quality that they wanted. And everyone had a great time. And it worked out really well. And we just had to give them everything exactly how they wanted it. And it was fun.
From your perspective, working within the business, to run something like an all-star game, what is the key benefit? I mean, you said having to put in 150 million. Is the economic benefit there? Do you still come out on the plus side of that? Is it just to market the city and the brand?
Yeah. Well, so specifically, the benefit of the all-star game is that you can give priority to your season ticket holders. That if you are a full season ticket holder, you have first priority to buy all-star game tickets that year, and then half season and 10-game packs and stuff like that. So just like the Winter Classic now, Winter Classic's even better because you've got 85,000 tickets to sell. So the Dallas Stars sold out at almost all their season based on packages that also include the right to buy Winter Classic tickets. So it's a great thing for the team in that regard. Okay. From an economic benefit standpoint to a city, why would the city of Dallas put $150 million into the arena? The reason is because they had to renovate that part of the city one way or the other. And they already had about probably $25 to $35 million earmarked to put road structure through that area by themselves. But they weren't going to do it until they had some developer that was going to put in hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to unlock that investment in the infrastructure, which is the city's responsibility. But then what they wanted to do is they wanted to have it done and also in a way that was kind of a contiguous, high quality design that was dense and urban and beautiful and wonderful, and not just some groups of apartments here and there as each individual developer is trying to make his 1 acre site profitable, right? They wanted something that was cohesive and integrated and really was like a whole little city to itself. So to do that, there's not many 78 acre developments that can be funded by themselves. You need a stimulator facility, you need a lot of investment. And so that's why the cities usually go in with a pro sports team or facility to be a stimulator venue inside of a master plan development like that, has all the elements that the municipality wants to have happen. And the reason they wanted that, so the vote was do two things, was raise the hotel room tax and the rental car tax. And then that tax money paid the city's $100 million, $120 million portion of it. They already had $30 million somewhere else in a bond package for infrastructure. So then as they collect that money into the project, then the activity at the facility in the district itself brings in more people to rent cars and to rent hotel rooms than the tax chills the marketplace, because the more the rooms cost and more tax, supply and demand works, right? So the stimulation of the events, the concerts, the games, the other activities is a more powerful stimulus acting against the downward gravity of the increased tax, right? So overall, they thought it would take 30 years to pay back their $120 million. It took them 8 years, right? Because not only did they attract the stars from outside of the city into the city, so all the sales tax now that the stars were selling now get paid into the city of Dallas instead of Irving where they were before. And then also the amount of revenue that both teams created much more sales tax than they ever had before. And that all was in the city of Dallas. And so the city of Dallas not only gets the sales tax revenue increases from hotel tax, room tax, and car tax, but they get that forever. because those taxes don't go away, right? So now all that money, not only did the city of Dallas say, hey, we think it might take 25 years, 30 years to pay it back, and it took 8, but now for the next 100 years, they get all the increased economic activity of those taxes and all the additional events that happen there because of the arena. And then what happened is, because you have this terrible area of town that is now brand spanking new, what else happened? There's probably about $4 billion of development of luxury condos, office buildings, restaurants, apartments, hotels that have gone in that area. And in Texas, property tax valuations are a big part of the valuation of municipalities, revenue for the municipalities. And then all that's done is it's moved all these people in from all over the country, here to live in uptown Dallas and downtown Dallas. And now it's completely renovated that part and driven their revenues way, way up, right? And so not only is more activity, more sales tax, but the property there is skyrocketed in value. And now there's this huge, dense vertical development that's happened there. And so the city of Dallas, it's literally the smartest thing they've ever done. And the best economic driver I think maybe they've ever done. The Dallas-Fort Worth Airport is probably the smartest thing the city of Dallas has ever done in conjunction with Fort Worth.
That place is enormous. We got lost trying to return our car there. When we
you just have to abandon it. You just
when we flew in, and we took the car all the way to New Orleans and all the way back, and there's like an entire different road area. Like it's not even connected to the airport, with like 9 different return car places. It was a minefield.
Okay. Well, the Dallas Fort Worth Airport area is larger than the island of Manhattan, so it's it's big.
Okay. Look, I think we're at least starting to get down towards the second half of this. Okay, so we're talking about All-Star Game, regular season and playoffs. What does that mean to you guys? How do you market yourself? Just the extension of that extra few months of playoffs, is that a huge driver of income for you?
It is. Well, when I was there, it was generally speaking, the playoffs and marketing and selling of playoffs games is a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you're good enough to make the playoffs, storylines are usually compelling. Your team is good, your players are heroes. There's been some drama, and so generally speaking, the playoffs, I don't want to say they always sell themselves. You have to price them, at a premium, but not too much of a premium, perhaps. But it's usually the storylines and drama and the heroes created by the regular season, help you dramatically in the playoffs. The harder part with it is sponsorships, right? Because corporations kind of want to have a fixed price that they're going to pay for the year. And so it's hard to get value by saying, hey, in the first round, your sponsorship is going to be extended by this much, the second round this much, the third round this much, and the Stanley Cup finals that much. That's why the Stanley Cup finals sponsorship assets, the nice logos and the dashboards and things like that, are kind of nationalized, as part of a national broadcast package, more so, because wherever it's played, there's really not time for the local team to monetize those the full value. So I think usually the conference finals and the finals, those assets mainly go over to the league, at least the camera side dashboards do, which is probably the best answer anyway, because you want to probably nationalize those and share them versus the teams that get there, they don't know they're going to get there. Sometimes they'll probably win game 7. Then you have a finals game 4 days later, 3 days later. You can't, resell everything at that time period. Or now in the contracts, you can have, stipulations for what they'll end up paying. But even that is so uncertain that a lot of the brands.
So it's more like really FIFA. FIFA sells the advertising of Coke, and then they just run for the duration
for
of
the
the
third and fourth rounds, generally speaking.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you may bonus the first and second rounds in at a low incremental cost in order just to get them to renew at a better rate or something like that. Gotcha. So really, you're kind of making almost more of a term play there for sponsorship revenue stability.
Okay. One of the big things, it's not unique to hockey by any stretch of the imagination, but as you said, some of these seats now for games can go for a couple $1,000. Is there any ever consideration giving to the long-term stability of the game when a large proportion of the people who view this are middle or lower income people, and what that means to having them as part of the fan base?
Yeah, well, I think in Canada, that's certainly true, right? There's a lot more, and there was a real Canada was slow to really get into the premium ticket pricing versus the United States. So in the late 90s, Detroit, Colorado, and Dallas, we were all competing for players. And so we were just stepping on the gas on ticket prices. And so there were a couple of years where Colorado and Dallas were the number 1 and 2 ticket revenue leaders in the league. And then Toronto figured out they could charge people whatever they wanted to. And so they quickly, went straight up. Montreal started doing the same. I think there is a danger there. I think that generally speaking, in professional sports, future venues won't have an upper deck because the experience of the upper deck is not, it should not be a winning equation versus a home broadcast environment or a bar broadcast environment because you're so far away. And so I think if you wanted to have a better experience for more people at a more affordable price, you would focus more on smaller venues with much better broadcast capabilities, camera placements, technology, things like that, and make the lower bowl and the suite levels will always produce enough revenue. But when you start building a facility, you start building like the upper deck, the higher in the air you build and the further out you go, the more expensive it is. And based on the geometry of the building, the smaller the concourse is to serve the upper deck fan. So the suite level and the lower bowl concourses have a lot of great amenities to them. The upper deck ones usually don't because everyone runs out of money at the end of their project. And so you have to bring the outside walls in. And so then the upper deck concourse is really small. And so not a great experience. You're far away from the play, you're high, it's expensive to build it. And it would be better to build that facility in a way that's really more of a TV broadcast studio with a lot of seats, and then make the at-home broadcast experience 20 times better. And then you would get more fans. And then you could almost create, kind of fan loyalty promotions to get them in to be able to sit, through some sort of club membership or viewing incentives, to then use the high quality kind of off-peak night, lower bowl or suite inventory as rewards to your I don't want to say lower socioeconomic class fans, but the bulk of your fans. Anyway, I think that's probably far off future trend.
Okay. For a more wider perspective, a question. There might be some people listening to this that work in amateur sport or help out their own community teams. Is there anything that you have done that you'd be able to take from what you've done at sort of the top echelon and say, if you implement this into your league or team now, you'd be able to get an outcome on it?
Well, I think, really a lot of the minor league teams and amateur teams do really an amazing job. The level of, quote unquote professionalism that they have at the lower levels is really quite impressive. And most of it is about engagement, experiential engagement, right? So even if you have college programs, you have minor league programs, the number one thing that everyone cares about is their own kids, right? And their kids play it, and no matter kind of what elevated level you play at, minor league, college, etc., having that sort of engagement between this person's child and the players who are kind of huge heroes to them. In some ways, it's like when you have a young son, you take him to a fire department, and they get to turn on the lights of the fire truck, and they get to see the equipment, they get to put the hat on, they get to put the galoshes on. They can't freaking believe it because they love firemen, they love fire trucks, they love the whole idea. Same thing with, well, I was about to say a police department, but maybe we'll skip that. Maybe we can edit out the police department part of that. They love trains. They love trains. So minor league sports and amateur sports, I think, have done really a great job, but it's really all about the experience of it and the engagement of it and bringing the people in there that are doing it, not necessarily for themselves, but for someone they care greatly about, a client or a family member, usually a child. And that's, once you can, because it's kind of a paradigm shift, right? You're like taking something that on its face, on scale, may not be that valuable. But if you constrict, just like we talked about the franchise leagues, if you had 100 NHL teams, not that valuable. But if you only have 32, you're restricting supply and demand, and it becomes more valuable. The same thing is true with your experiences, right? Instead of charging $5 stage for 100 people, you charge $500 for 10 people. And so you make more revenue, it's more special, becomes more of a story, have a velvet rope, you get to go where other people don't get to go, because it's a very human desire is to, I got to do something that most people don't get to do. And then they become, the grassroots marketing to market experience.
Okay. One of the things that I very much enjoy still that hockey does comparatively to other pro sports is that they play heavy metal during the intermissions. I'm a
Right.
big fan that
Right.
when I go to watch
Right.
hockey, I hear Metallica, Pantera, Megadeth,
Yeah.
Slayer, all those sorts of bands play.
Well, do you want to hear a good Pantera story?
This is what I'm after. So you guys,
Yeah.
there's a song called "Puck Off," which is effectively like the Dallas Cowboys from Hell song that they did off their first album, and I know that they were huge Dallas Stars fan. I know that there's a hell of a story about Guy Carbonneau and the Stanley Cup at Vinnie Paul's house.
Yeah.
I've seen separate interviews with, what's his name? Craig
Ludwig.
Craig Ludwig talking about his friendship with them. They are my favorite band in the world. There's a whole bunch of Pantera promo photos with, Vinnie Paul wearing his Stars jerseys. They seem to have been there all the time. How did this song come about? I've seen some other stories that this song was played in the dressing room during the playoffs, which is why they hold the band sort of partly responsible for their Stanley Cup win, which is how they had the party afterwards. Tell me if I'm wrong. Let me in on some of these insights.
No, it's well documented. So Craig, there's a bar called, I think, the Big Apple, and it was Arlington or someplace, and the Pantera guys were there quite a bit, and Craig was there quite a bit, and they were big hockey fans. And so Craig Ludwig is this old school hockey player. He was on the Montreal Canadiens.
Oh yeah, I remember him prior from years ago.
He was built like a oaken barrel, like the type of barrels they used to take
Tennessee whiskey
rail cars and just take across the country. Like one time after he was retired, we were at a watching party for the Stars. We're at the bar watching the game, and the other team scores a goal, and all of a sudden his beer spills, and so he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry." I'm like, "Oh, no worries." And so we get some napkins, we're cleaned up, and I'm like, "Your hand's bleeding." He's like, "Oh yeah." And so he gets the napkin and he starts stomach. He was holding his beer stein, and when they scored, he got so mad he crushed it.
Right.
Which is like impossible to do. And so he sliced his hand in half because he smashed that beer stein because our defenseman, didn't lay down for the puck or whatever. And so he's bleeding like a sieve, and his beer is everywhere. And so I'm like, "Craig, you got to go to the hospital and get stitches." And he's like, "There is no way I'm leaving here." So we just ordered him 2 beers next time, and so he was fine.
Right.
So he's a big, powerful guy. And so we're in a really tough series with the St. Louis Blues. They have Pierre Turgeon. They've got, I think, we had Brett Hall by then. So they still had a lot of really good players there. Really a tough team. Curtis Joseph, I think, was still there. Chris Pronger probably was still there, but they're like a really good team. And so Craig, we'd beaten San Jose pretty good in the first round, but as we were going up there, Craig thought we need a little bit of lift, and so we talked to guys at Pantera and said, "Hey, we need a little fire up song." So they made the song. They sent him a cassette tape or whatever it was at the time, and so like in between periods, they deliver this to him, or it gets delivered to him, and he puts it in it, and it's just awesome. And so it fires everybody up. They go out and win, whatever. So then we played the Colorado Avalanche in the Western Conference Finals, which is a bloodbath. Like it was the most violent series. Like Peter Forsberg is just two-handed slashing Derian Hatcher and Richard Matvechuk, just chopping them. And then we were like, what our guys did to Joe Sakic should be a crime. Like it was just like, oh my God, like it was terrible. What they did to Mike Madonna was a crime. Like it was just like, it was a prison brawl. And we end up winning because Eddie Belfour was just, unbelievable. And the whole team was.
Well, and Belfour should be convicted of crimes half the time too for what he used to do.
Oh, well, he is convicted of crime. He is actually convicted of crimes, but he's a great guy. But he's, he has, some problems, but a great guy. And did more Make-A-Wish tours and things than any other player did on our team ever. So Eddie Belfour, okay, great guy. You don't want to go drinking with him because it may not end up great, but he's a great guy.
I remember one match, I can't remember, I think it was with the Blackhawks or someone came behind his net that he didn't care for.
Yeah.
And he just, with the blocker hand straight down the pipe.
He's not, and no one messed with Eddie. No one messed with Eddie ever. And came out better for it because he won't quit. But so we beat them, then we go to the finals and we beat Buffalo. So we're in Buffalo and we're flying back, and my job was to organize the parade if we won. And my wife's job, and she was, like I said, almost about to give birth to our first child, was to sell the merchandise, right?
Okay.
And so we get back, and the game went like 4 overtimes. We fly back. We land back at DFW 6 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And by law, because there had been a riot at the Dallas Cowboys Super Bowl parade once you won, you only had like 48 hours to have your parade for some reason. And so, because also all the players have had a really long playoff year and they want to go home too. And so I had to rush down to our fairgrounds, and we had to have the parade floats already start being built to some degree so we could be ready in case we won. And so with each playoff victory we'd have, I'd release a little bit of higher percentage of the contract to build these parade floats. So this guy named Clyde Watts, who had not all of his teeth, and he's building these, he's building all these parade floats for us. And so I had to go down there on a Sunday morning, and I'm down there, and all of a sudden my cell phone rings, and it's Craig Ludwig. And he goes, Geoff, are you doing the parade? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, if Pantera wants to be in the parade, can we have to give them their own float? And I was like, oh, yeah. So I went to Clyde, and I said, Clyde, how many floats do we have? And he goes, well, we got this. And so we started messing with the layout. I said, so if I move Madonna and Lettinen off this float to that float, and can you make a couple more handles, weld a couple more handles there? He's like, yeah. If I move Moore and Zubov to this float, can you put a couple more there? Yeah. So then I can give Pantera their own float. And he's like, oh, yeah. So I said, can you build an area for their speakers? And so he goes, oh, yeah, because Clyde was a heavy metal fan too. And so I called Craig back and said, we're done. We got this. We can absolutely have a parade float for Pantera in the parade. And so we made it work. And it was chaotic and awesome. And they all painted their bodies green.
Oh, green. I've seen some of those old promo photos.
And went crazy. And so we had this parade ends up at the arena. Then we had this arena event. So we had the stage there, and we have all the team come out. And so we have the entire team back there, and we have Craig and back there. And none of the players have been to bed for, I think, since the game ended. It's 48 hours later, maybe 72 hours later. I don't think any of them have been to bed. And certainly none of them have stopped drinking during that time. And so right before Ludwig, he's number 3, where I think we're going out by numerical or by or something like that. So as soon as Craig's about to go out, I'm like, Craig, time to go. And he just turns, he vomits in the hallway and goes, okay, I'm ready. And then he walks out. I was like, oh my God, So it was and then the party that had over Pantera's house before that, the Stanley Cup is hollow, right?
Yeah.
So you have the rings, and then you have a bar down the middle that screws in, matches the whole thing together, and so it's hollow, so it's not all that heavy. And so if you throw it from the balcony to the pool, you would think it's light enough to make it all the way into the pool, but it wasn't.
Can you just recap that story? A lot of people aren't going to know this, but the drinking continued at Vinnie Paul's house.
So there's 2 Stanley Cups, right? There's one that's always in the Hockey Hall of Fame, and one that gets taken by Phil Pritchard and the caretakers around to the players and the parties and things like that. But the caretakers can only do so much. And so, and you're on this balcony at, I think, Vinnie Paul's house, and there's a pool. So there's these old legends about, when the Montreal Canadiens used to win, they'd go to the bridge, they'd drink out of the cup, and they'd throw it into the river. And then it would be, land on the ice on the river, and then they'd go back the next day and get the cup off the ice and stuff like that. So someone had the bright idea to drink from the cup on the balcony and then throw it into the pool and see if it would float or sink. And they didn't quite get it all the way there. So it bounces, and then, luckily it's silver and hollow. You just have someone tink it out real quick and get the dents out of it. It just adds character.
Cool. Look, we're getting down just to the last question. So just from your own perspective, what you learned and became a hockey fan, you mentioned that you hated playing Detroit. Well, what are some of the other great rivalries that you remember, and what are some of your favorite memories when you were working
Well, Colorado was great. And why we could beat Colorado and we couldn't beat Detroit, and Colorado could beat Detroit, I'm not sure. But I remember when Detroit put the Russian players together, and my
there?
brother, who was not a hockey fan, came to a game with me one time. We're playing the playoffs. We're in the first round against Detroit, and they're just dominating us.
Mm.
And he looks at me and he says, "Is there any rule that states that we get to touch the puck during the game?" And I'm like, "No, there's not."
Well, this only reminds me that Igor Larionov used to be a Canuck before he was a Red Wing, but yes.
Yeah, well, and and then the guy from San Jose, I think, won Rookie of the Year over Mike Modano.
Mm.
So it's like at 34 years old, he wins Rookie of the Year. So the uh, the beauty of those players playing together, and I think the tragedy of Konstantinov being paralyzed in their post Stanley Cup parade accident is terrible, because he was unbelievable, and he really kind of brought, I think, their whole squad together, and seeing them play the game was beautiful. I would say probably on some level similar to what Gretzky did years before with Edmonton, that
Mm.
they changed generations of players after them. And so when you see Tiger Woods play, Tiger Woods used to win tournaments over guys who had my body type. Well, that can't happen anymore, because there is no one that doesn't look like Tiger Woods, physique now, right?
Mm.
Because he changed everything after him in golf, and that's why Tiger Woods is one of the greatest golfers ever. You can say Nicklaus and certainly other players were really, really great, but did they change everything after them? And the answer is Tiger did. Same a little bit with Michael Jordan. Is that he changed things so fundamentally that or Gretzky, really, like
Mm.
Gretzky changed everything after him. But the Russian players, I think, too, changed a lot of the way hockey was played afterwards.
As
Uh,
as
Great
an
testament to
outsider
him.
looking in who wasn't a hockey fan originally, again, as I said, I'm down in Oz, raised Canadian. Gretzky is, and apparently according to his points totals, when you compare it, he is effectively the greatest athlete in a team sport ever.
Yeah.
Um, as someone who sort of moved into it, I guess the argument is sometimes Michael Jordan or other players. That how do you sort of rank him in other sports in terms of his points
No,
totals and what he
I
did?
think he was just completely different, because it's when Jordan played, he was better than everybody else, but there were a lot of people that were similar to him in a lot of ways. And I think just Gretzky seemed to be just on his greatness was before my time in the league, but he just was just like he was playing a different game. It's a little bit like if you look at Babe Ruth's home run totals.
Mm.
Like Babe Ruth hit more home runs himself than some teams hit at that time. He changed the way the baseball was played, right? And because a lot of people didn't think home runs were as good as doubles back then, and Babe Ruth just fundamentally changed it.
Right.
And so I think that when you look at, Jackie Robinson changed it from a racial standpoint in professional sports. I mean, there's Wilt Chamberlain, in basketball, and just what a big person could do changed the way that, kind of the mindset of what a 7-foot player might be.
Mm.
And then even like in a way, people like Dirk Nowitzki and other people who are big guys that shot as well as they did and start playing different positions, I think also had, big changes for people, because at some point, just being tall was, a real asset in basketball, and that's just not the case anymore. So I think there's the people that just inspire like the entire system to change because of what they can do, are the ones who I think are just, like Giannis right now in the NBA. I mean, he's someone who's, he's really changing things.
I asked you for it before we started recording, so a lot of people are going to want to know about this because you haven't told the story. The Mooterus jersey for the Stars was considered at the time the most abhorrent, hideous jersey that could ever been released. And like a lot of things, it has now developed its sort of own cult status where it trades, and it's quite a valuable jersey if you get the official one on the market these days.
That's terrible.
I I don't think it's that bad. I think the term Mooterus is much worse than the jersey itself.
Yeah.
But can you tell us about
the origin story of that?
Yeah.
So the idea was a good one, which is there was an agency that designed the New York Rangers third jersey, their Statue of Liberty jersey, and they did a great job. It was an awesome jersey and really great. So at the time, our vice president of sales and marketing was a guy named Brian Perez, really smart guy, CEO of a ticketing company now, really smart guy. And so he hired that same agency and said, we want to come up with kind of the Texas version of the New York Rangers, Statue of Liberty jersey. So we want to add a new color, something vibrant. So we want a black jersey. We want something that kind of dimensionalizes kind of the name stars. And so all the concept stuff really checked out right, which was the black jersey, the green and gold with it, and the introduction of a new red color really looked great. The constellation element with the stars was cool. Kind of doing the bull head, couldn't do the horn of Texas, so they did the horns down thing and kind of made it a constellation played where you have the kind of a bull head and the constellation with the stars, and the red's the comet. So I think conceptually everything was really cool. It's just when you put it together, it didn't quite connect. And then especially when someone says, well, it looks like they have a intestinal
looks like a uterus.
like they need help. And Brian, who's a very smart guy, wonderful guy, worked with a really small team, the VP of merchandising, the VP of marketing, and the three of them had kind of kept a real kind of close deal on it. And I think the problem was they had a checklist of things they wanted to accomplish, and the design of the jersey accomplished all the things they wanted, but no one stepped back and said, we know the inside story of why we like it, but now we're going to show it to 20 people that don't know anything about it and get feedback, right? Because they want to keep it a tight lid on development of it. And so in skipping that last step, which is if someone has no idea what the story is, will they like it? And that's when it failed. Is that, but by that time, we'd already committed to it, we'd already bought thousands of it, etc. And so actually my ascension to being the next executive vice president of sales and marketing actually became kind of a part of that opportunity, which is there was a lot of internal and then
sorry, Geoff, I lost you there for about a minute again after you said part of my ascension. The Wi-Fi dropped out again.
So I came up with a series of events that were like player fashion shows and an early influencer campaign, and kind of, I don't want to say rescued the launch of it, but helped the launch of it overcome a lot of the early skepticism. And that's kind of when I think my boss said, well, hey, if we're going to make some changes going forward, then you would be good in this role. And so really, I guess my change from, vice president of business operations to executive vice president of sales and marketing came from trying to rescue that project. And it was, except for, how sometimes like you'll meet an adult and they'll have a terrible nickname that's really demeaning. Yeah. And they say, I remember the second I got that nickname in 4th grade and it stuck for the rest of my life. When someone coined the phrase Mooterus, that was it. As soon as someone said it the first time, it lasted forever. It was instantaneously that forever. And as soon as that happened, whatever good qualities the jersey had were just, and as soon as someone said it and people saw it, it was over. Like my wife was the director of merchandising at the time. Yes. As soon as she said it, she goes, oh my God, that looks like an inflamed uterus. And I was like, oh, geez, And so it was one of those things. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. So that's the story of the Mooterus.
That's awesome.
That's the real story of the Mooterus.
That's what I've got for you today. Do you want to just remind people what you're up to now and where they can find you at these days?
Yeah. So I'm the president and COO of NB Gaming. So we run esports teams. We have in Call of Duty, we have the Dallas Empire, which is a very good team. In the Overwatch League, we have the Dallas Fuel. We have a Counter-Strike team under the name Team NB. We have just bought a Rocket League team for your fans who like to play Rocket League. And we're just essentially developing esports as the next big Dallas sports franchise. And so far, so good. It's going really, really well. I hate to say the pandemic's been good for us, but we still play our games, from the players' individual apartments and homes. And so, esports is a big part of the future, and I'm just learning a lot every day.
Look, we'll probably have to have on again then, because I don't know anything about this world, but even over here, most professional sports teams are now tacking on esports teams onto their franchises. So, but look, thanks very much for your time. I assume it's got to be about 9:30 at night there for you. So, and I should probably do some work on my side of the
there we
world.
go.
So, all right, well, awesome. Well, thanks very much for your time, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Perfect. Thanks for all this. Bye.